working on a classic fanny pack. So it has the strapping that goes around the waist. It also has a curved flap around the front. This fanny pack is fully lined, so there are no raw edges in the fanny pack. For this version here, I chose to use denim, and I also added a little embroidery to the front, which is fun. You'll notice that the zipper goes around the curved flap here. If you're not terribly comfortable with zippers or you haven't installed very many, installing a zipper on a curve can be a bit of a challenge. So if that's something that you don't feel quite ready for, my next tutorial is going to be a flat fanny pack. So while this one has space on the sides, my next video will be one that's completely flat, which has a much easier zipper installation if that's something that you'd be more interested in. But let's go ahead and get started. The first thing you're going to need is your fabrics. You're going to want to choose a fabric for the outside as well as the inside. For the interior fabric, I'm using just regular cotton. For the exterior fabric, I'm going to be using cotton as well, but to make it a little sturdier, I'm going to be using a woven interfacing on the back side of my main fabric to give it a little bit more stability. You can also, for your main fabric, use a denim or canvas. On the example I just showed you, the exterior fabric for that was a 12-ounce denim, and no interfacing was necessary because it was sturdy enough on its own. In addition to your fabric, you're going to want a 14-inch zipper that has a zipper tape that is 1 inch wide. You're also going to want a 1-inch side release clasp. You'll also want a 1-inch tri-glide if you want your waistband to be adjustable. You're also going to need 1-inch wide webbing or strapping for the waist. Once you have all your supplies, the next thing you want to do is go ahead and print off your pattern. The free pattern is available on my website and is linked below. Print it out at actual size, make sure it's not scaled. Cutting is usually not the part of the sewing experience that people look forward to. So here are a few tips to make cutting your pieces easier, since you do need to cut these from both your main fabric and your lining. So here are some things you can do. First, if you're using interfacing, fuse that to your main fabric prior to cutting. That works really well, especially if you're using a fat quarter for your main fabric, because it tends to correspond well to the width of the interfacing. But that will mean you only have to cut out the pieces once instead of twice. Similarly, if you press your fabric really well prior to cutting, you can stack your main fabric with your lining fabric and cut them out at the same time. So that's what I did here. I placed my main fabric on top of my lining fabric and cut the pieces out together. Once you've got your pieces cut out, it's time to transfer your markings. I'm going to turn my front piece right side down, and I'm going to take my pattern piece and I'm going to lay it on top of the fabric. Notice on my pattern piece, I have cut out windows where the darts are placed. And I'm going to go ahead and trace the placement of those darts. I'm also going to take the time to mark the center. So I'm going to mark the top center and the bottom center. Make sure you do this for your lining piece as well as for your main fabric. You're also going to want to mark the center on the top piece. You also want to mark the centers on the back piece. I also like to mark the center on the zipper. My zipper is 14 inches long from stopper to stopper, so I'm going to put a guide mark at 7 inches. All of your marks should be placed, and now we're ready to start sewing. Let's begin with the front piece. We're going to start by sewing our darts. To sew your darts, fold your fabric in half so that the peak of the dart is on the fold line. So you're going to be folding down the center of the dart there. And fold it in half. I like to place a pin through the line of my dart, and when it comes out the other side, it should also be on the line. And again, double check to make sure the peak of the dart is on the fold. Do the same on the other side. Okay, and now we're going to go to the sewing machine and we're going to stitch along the curved line here. We're going to do so on both sides. Once you've sewn the darts in the main fabric, go ahead and repeat the process for the lining. After that's done, we're going to trim away the seam allowances. So on your dart, you can see your stitch line, and we're going to trim that seam allowance to be roughly 1/4 inch. Do the same on the other side. This will just help reduce some of the bulk, and repeat for the main fabric. For my main fabric, I'm going to press the seam allowance out towards the edge and out towards the edge. So let's grab the iron. Now let's press on the lining. On the lining, I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to press the seam allowance towards the center. By having the seam allowances go in opposite directions, when we put our bag together, it will help reduce the bulk. Let's add our zipper. Take your main front piece, grab your zipper. Now the first thing you want to do is figure out which side of your fanny pack you want the zipper tab to be on. I recommend just holding this up to yourself as well as the zipper to see which side you'd like it on. So for me, I want to be able to open the fanny pack with my right hand. So when I'm wearing it, it's going to be facing this direction like this. And I want to be able to grab it with my right hand and pull. You can put it the opposite direction if you like. So when I wear my fanny pack, I want the pull to be on this end. So I'm going to take my zipper and I'm going to turn it right side down. So this means the zipper pull where you would grab is facing down. And I'm going to lay the zipper on top of my fabric. Again, the right side of the zipper is touching the right side of the fabric. And now I'm going to align the center of the zipper with the center of the front piece. So you could see my markings aligning there. You want the edge of the zipper to align with the top edge of your fabric. So I like to pin the centers first. And when I put my pins in my fabric for zippers, I like to angle them. I don't want my pins to actually go over the zipper because then that can tend to distort things. Some people like to put their pins this way when sewing zippers, and that's totally fine as well. So you can use whichever method you're most comfortable with. Okay, I am going to go to my sewing machine and I'm going to make sure that my zipper foot is attached, and I'm going to stitch my zipper in place 1/4 inch away from the edge. Make sure that your seam allowance is accurate. It will help later. So 1/4 inch from the edge. If you have a Purple Thang tool that you use, it's really handy because one end is exactly 1/4 inch. And so you can use that to judge if your seam allowance is accurate if you have that tool as well. So let's head to the sewing machine. For added stability when sewing with the zipper foot, make sure that your needle passes through the window in the foot. When you get to the end, you may need to stop, lift up your zipper foot, slide your zipper tab out of the way, and continue sewing. My zipper is now attached to my main fabric, and you can open up your zipper to make sure it moves smoothly before continuing on. Next, we're going to add the lining. So I still have my zipper right side down against my main fabric. Next, I'm going to take my lining piece, my front piece, and I'm going to lay it right side down on top of the others. I'm going to line the center mark for my front piece with the center mark on my zipper. So now I kind of have a sandwich. I've got my main fabric on the outside, my zipper in the middle, and my lining fabric on the other side. And again, the lining is right side down. And go ahead and pin in place. Now, if you prefer, you can sew the lining fabric to the zipper at the same time that you sew the main fabric. I just prefer to do it in 2 steps. Okay, and we're going to go back to the sewing machine and sew this in place, again with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And if you like, you can stitch directly on top of your previous stitches. Our zipper is now attached to both the lining and the main fabric. Go ahead and push the zipper up, tucking the lining behind the main fabric. At this point, I like to press my fabric away from my zipper teeth, so I'll gently pull the fabric away. And if you need to, you can use a pressing tool such as a pressing ham, since this is a curved shape. Okay, again, test your zipper to make sure it works properly. And now let's add the top flap. Lay your zipper panel right side up. Make sure you're looking at the exterior fabric. Grab the top flap piece from the same print and turn it right side down on top of your front piece. You'll notice that on your top piece here, you have a curved edge and a straight edge. The curved edge is the one that's attached to the zipper. So find the center mark on the curved edge, and you're going to align it with the center mark on your zipper. The edge of the fabric should align with the edge of the zipper tape. Pin it in place. As you pin, remember that this is an object that's not going to be flat. So you have to curve the zipper as you would when it's being worn. When you get to the top edge, your fabric here on the corner should align very closely with the edge of the front piece. My top piece is now pinned in place. I'm going to go to the sewing machine and sew this with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. When I start sewing, I'll often hold my fabric up to where it's slightly curved. I find it's easier to get started that way. My zipper is now attached. I'm going to check to make sure it opens properly. Okay, and now we're going to add the lining. Turn the pouch so that the lining is on the outside. Grab the top flap piece from your lining print. Turn it right side down. So the right side of the top piece is touching the right side of the front piece. Identify the curved edge of your flap and align the center mark of your curved edge with the center mark on your zipper. Pin in place. Okay, my lining's pinned in place, and I'm going to go back to the sewing machine and sew that zipper again, and I'm going to sew exactly on top of my previous stitches. My lining's now attached to my zipper, so I'm going to check one more time, make sure it opens okay. That works good. I'm also going to check to make sure I didn't get any accidental little pleats on my zipper panel. And then as before, I'm going to press the fabric away from the zipper. So I've already done the front piece, so I'm just going to work on the flap. Once your zipper's been installed and you've checked to make sure that there are no errors, it's time to go ahead and top stitch this zipper in place. You can top stitch with your zipper either open or closed. For the top stitch, we're going to be stitching close to the zipper. So we're going to be sewing along the edge of the fabric to hold it in place so it doesn't puff or pucker. I'm going to be sewing with about 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. And when I top stitch, I like to use a longer stitch length. So I'll be using a stitch length of about 3.5. Depending on your machine, you may still need to use your zipper foot when top stitching, or your regular foot may be fine. For my machine, the regular foot works great, so that's what I'm going to be using. And I have my zipper open, and I'm going to stitch first along the zipper top. A quick note on top stitching. Top stitching really is essential because it just helps your zipper lay so much nicer. But you can do a lot with top stitching. On this one, I chose to use black thread. I didn't really want you to see the top stitching. I just wanted to hold the fabric in place. So you can't really see my stitches here. When I made this fanny pack, I wanted the top stitching to be visible. So you can see here, I used a contrasting thread that stood out a lot because I wanted you to see it so that this would have more of a denim feel. So you can either use coordinating thread or contrasting thread, whichever you prefer. That can be a nice decorative element to your fanny pack. Once your zipper's been attached, you'll notice that you may have the ends of your zipper tape hanging off. You don't want that. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to trim off the edge of the zipper tape. Now, because I cut off that stopper, I can no longer open my zipper all the way. The zipper pull would fall off. So if you want to, you can zigzag over the end to make your own stopper. On this side, you have to be careful. On this side, when you trim off your zipper tape, you don't want to cut off the zipper pull. We need that. So make sure that that is inside your fabric area. I like to use a clip to hold the zipper tape together. And then on this one, I am going to stitch it in place because I want this to stay closed bit. So let's head to the sewing machine. One great way to create a zipper stop at the end of zipper tape, like I mentioned before, is to slide it and do a zigzag back and forth on the edge of the teeth. My machine, however, is a straight stitch machine and it only does a straight stitch. So I'm just going to hold my zipper together and close to the edge, about 1/4 of an inch from the end, I'm just going to back stitch over it. And I stitch over it several times. And this will hold my zipper together. Now that I have the zipper pull in the fabric area and the zipper ends secured here, I'm going to go ahead and trim off the excess zipper tape. The front and top of our fanny pack are done, so now it's time to add the sides. The side pieces have a sharp point down at the bottom edge and swoop up to 2 narrow sides that will go into our strapping. To place the side pieces, turn them right side down and align them with the side edge. When you align your side pieces with the side edge, the sharp point will align with the corner. And then the curved edge goes up around by the zipper. You'll notice that my lining fabric extends just a bit. I'm going to go ahead and trim that off. And I'm going to pin this in place. Once that's pinned in place, flip it over. Grab the side piece that matches the same side. Turn it right sides down next to your lining. Line up the sharp point with the corner edge. And pin. Once your lining's pinned in place, you can remove the pins from the other side because it should be securing both. Now we're going to go ahead and we are going to stitch this in place. When you sew with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, it should line up exactly with this point here. So let's go to the sewing machine. We're going to be aligning our seam allowance with this straight edge here. So we're going to sew straight down. Do not follow the curve here. We're going to start just a 1/2 inch away from here and sew a completely straight line. Press them in place. Once your side pieces have been pressed, we're going to go ahead and top stitch them in place with about 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. And as before, you can have your top stitching blend in or show. So on my denim fanny pack, I wanted you to be able to see the top stitching, so I did a row of stitching at about 1/8 of an inch and one and again at 3/8 because I wanted you to be able to see it. But on this fanny pack, I want it to blend in, so I'm just going to do 1/8 of an inch next to my seam on the side piece side. And I'm going to do that for both sides. We're getting close. It's starting to look like a fanny pack. Let's prepare the strapping for our waistband. I've cut my strapping into two pieces. I have one piece that is 8 inches long and one piece that is 18.5 inches long, and I'm going to make my strapping adjustable. So the first thing you want to figure out when you're doing your strapping is what you want where. Because I am right-handed, I want this piece to be on my right side. This will be shorter, which will make it easier to reach when I need to take the fanny pack on and off. Similarly, I want on the right side the clips so that I can use my right hand to release the fanny pack. So when I'm wearing my fanny pack, I want this to be on the right with this short piece. I'm going to turn my side release clasp right side up, and I'm going to take my strapping and place it from the top down to the bottom. I'm going to insert my strapping so that about 3/4 of an inch extends beyond the edge of the side release clasp, and I'm going to pin it in place. I now have my strapping pinned to one side of my side release clasp. I'm going to grab my long piece of strapping, and I'm going to go from the wrong side and insert it into the farthest opening. So I'm going to go up through the bottom and pull it out towards the front. Then I'm going to take the free end and go through the opening that's closer to the center. You'll notice that you have two ends of strapping that are connected to your side release clasp. The one that's coming out the opening closest to the center, this one here, we're going to attach to our tri-glide. So grab your tri-glide piece. My tri-glide is sitting up, so my ridges are right here on top. I'm going to go up through this side and down through this one. So up through the left and down through the right. I'm going to have to sew this on the sewing machine, so when I look at it flat like this, I want this to extend again about 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch beyond the edge of my tri-glide. And I'm going to pin that in place. Okay. Once you have that attached, go ahead and slide your free end up through the right hand side and down through the left hand side of your tri-glide. What I like to do now is just check and see if it works. So before I go ahead and sew this in place on my sewing machine, I like to pin it to the ends of my fanny pack and try it on. So what I would do is I take my free end, overlap it 1 inch, and pin. Take the other end, overlap it 1 inch, and pin. And then I would try it on to make sure it's a good size. If you're in one of my sewing classes and you're using pre-cut strapping, if you find that this is too big and you need to shorten the strapping, what you can do is instead of overlapping it about 3/4 of an inch, you can pull this farther and make a bigger loop if you need to make a smaller fanny pack. But once you've checked to make sure that your strapping fits, it's time to go ahead and sew it in place. On the side with the short piece of strapping, we're going to go ahead and sew this in place here. You can use a zigzag, a triple stitch, or what I'm going to do is 2 rows of straight stitches, and I'm going to back stitch a couple times to make sure it's super strong. Then on this side, we need to sew right here. So what you'll want to do to be able to sew that is you can remove this edge if you need to, and go ahead and sew this in place. My buckles are now attached to my strapping. If you removed this end to sew your tri-glide in piece, let's go ahead and put that back. So you have the end that has the tri-glide attached. Take your free end and slide it through and out the back. My strapping pieces are now attached. I'm ready to put them on the fanny pack. Lay your fanny pack right side up, and I'm going to lay it right side down along the edge, and I'm going to center it so there should be about 1/2 inch below and 1/2 inch above the edge of your strapping. Align the edge with the edge of the fabric. Take your second piece of strapping, place it right side down along the other edge. Again, make sure both layers of fabric are flat. Make sure that it's centered and lined with the edge. We're going to baste both of these strapping pieces in place using a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Our straps are attached. Go ahead and place them in the center of the fanny pack. You want to make sure that they are not in the path of the edges. We're going to go ahead and apply the back of the fanny pack. Grab your back piece. The flat edge is the top. The curved edge is the bottom. We're going to align this with the rest of our fanny pack. Make sure you identify your center points. Align the top center mark with the top center of your fanny pack flap. Pin all of the layers together. Align the bottom center points. And pin all the way around the edges. Now that it's all pinned, I'm ready to go to the sewing machine, and I'm going to stitch all the way around, all the way around. Because there won't be an opening to turn, you want to make sure that your zipper is open a little. So you can kind of fill your zipper tab through, and you can do this before you pin as well to make it a little easier, but just wiggle that zipper tab a little and make sure you have an opening in your zipper. Go ahead and stitch all the way around. Okay, we're going to sew all the way around with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. I like to sew with the back piece on the bottom. Once that's all stitched in place, you may want to turn it right side out to check to make sure everything looks right. Once you've done that, go ahead and turn it back to look like this. And we're going to kind of fold down the front just a bit to make it a little bit more flat. And then we're going to grab our next back piece. So here's our other back piece for the lining. go ahead and turn it right side down on top of the whole fanny pack. Align your top and bottom centers and pin all the way around once again. My lining back is all pinned in place, so now it kind of looks like a fanny pack sandwich. We have the lining back on one side and the front back on the other side. And now we're going to go ahead and sew once again. We're going to sew exactly on top of our previous stitches, except for this time we're going to leave an opening to turn. So on the bottom edge here, I'm going to put some double pins. So I'm going to start sewing here. I'm going to sew up and all the way around, and I'm going to stop sewing here. I'm going to leave this open to turn the fanny pack. The opening's now closed in the bottom of the lining. So continue to turn it right side out. Our fanny pack is now fully lined. You can add a zipper pull if you like, that will help opening and closing it. And the last thing you can do, if you like, is to press your fanny pack. If you have a pressing ham or a sleeve roll, those work great.